Up next is Brian. Brian, so one more circle to the Venn diagram. Who here would call themselves an anarchist? Fewer of those, but a few each time, okay. So I wish someone was actually drawing this Venn diagram, right? Sort of approximating the size of the circles. Yeah, we need more diagrams. Explain it to me using a matrix. So Brian, gosh, I don't know how to intro you. Same deal. Old vegan straight edge friend from like the punk rock days that we've kept in contact and sort of have these like wildly divergent paths in our lives that manage to crisscross occasionally. And then when I was doing this thing, I was like, I've got to get Brian out here. He's so sort of, I mean, pun time, like he was so off the map of what everyone else was, or like what the sort of Venn diagram of, you know, that iteration of the conference, and I wanted that part of sort of my story that you know, that's I've actually been pulling, this has sort of been 2.5 years of performance art where I've been punking you all into listening to things I care about. And so that's sort of what Brian was like, I need the wingnut anarchist. So I call up my boy Brian, and he delivered. So he was kind enough to come back and do it one more time. Thanks, Brian.
So, anarchism. The idea that everyone deserves complete self-determination. The opposition to oppression, to people having power over each other. The idea that we shouldn't impose any kind of hierarchies or any kind of power differentials on people, whether those be gender norms or white supremacy, state power, private property. Sort of an outlier philosophy. I see that not everybody here believes that you would be better off without the NSA, the police department, and so on. But what reason do you have to listen to me, then, if you are, I'm guessing, a computer programmer? Well, I'll recapitulate some of the arguments that I made last time I was here, and maybe end with something even more useful than I did then. First, proponents of radical social change are often thinking further outside the box than people who are trying to solve present market challenges. I'll give an example of this. It was the 1990s, and the way that media worked was top-down and unidirectional. The money that was being made in television, newspapers. I was part of an obscure subculture that was making a more radical demand. The radical demand we were making was horizontality, was that we should be able to make media for each other directly, peer-to-peer. Now, at the time, this was an unusual thing to demand, and something that was ahead of the curve. Now, it doesn't sound radical to y'all, because the corporations that have made new money in the last decade and a half have made it off of providing exactly this demand, right? Our demand has become totally passé, actually. Now, last time I was here, I told the story of how this took place. You can see this taking place, first of all, in the forms of the new technologies, the new social media. You could also tell the story in terms of the personal histories of many of the people who've produced these. My example was Twitter, which was originally invented as text mob by anarchists for social movement, for social struggles, right? Text mob was supposed to direct people in the streets to keep aware of police movements and to be able to act collectively, immediately, autonomously. Now we have Twitter, which enables us to do that only in some kind of weird marketing behavior. So we didn't exactly win, but the point is that we were ahead of the curve in an interesting way. So when I concluded last time, I tried to identify what it was that anarchists now are talking about that might be of interest to y'all. And my conclusion was not as daring as it should have been. It was not radical enough. You know, I said, in an era of total connectivity, what is the radical demand? Well, and extrapolating from my own experience in the streets, in street protest activity, where over the last decade and a half we've seen what is sometimes called black bloc activity become more and more common, where people protest in a completely anonymous form. First, it's famous in the United States from the Seattle WTO protests in '99, but this year it's become instrumental in protest movements in Egypt and now Brazil. So extrapolating from that, I came here and I said, the next radical demand is going to be anonymity. Anonymity is going to be really important in a world of total connectivity. Now, fast forward about a year later, and the Snowden revelations reveal the things that anarchists knew 10 years earlier, actually, about how the NSA is monitoring everybody. I remember after I spoke last time, somebody came up to me and was like, "Oh, this is all very interesting. What do you imagine for a business model?" And I'm like, "Oh, well, you're asking the anarchist for a business model. Actually, I'm anti-business and anti-model. This is your problem, you know?" And now, today, I'm told that the investors in Silicon Valley are scrambling right now to figure out how to make money off of everybody's desire for confidential transfer of information. So I have to send a shout out to leap.se. Throw up your hand if you know about this. Very few people are actually prepared to solve this problem. Go ahead and look up leap.se if you have the opportunity. May or may not be ahead of the curve. But the point is that I only gave you all a year warning. If somebody had seen my speaking event and raced home and created all the software that you needed for complete computer confidentiality, then you would probably be making a lot of money right now. But I didn't give you enough warning. So I'm going to try to think a little bit more radically about what could be most challenging for y'all. This is me speaking a little off the cuff, a little bit more honestly. I'm going to say the social media technology that we have today marginalizes people. The idea is that it's supposed to connect people in new ways, in ways that fulfill all of the radical demands that we had in the 1990s, where we wanted to become the media, where we wanted to be the story. But in fact, in a world where everyone has an iPhone, there are two kinds of marginalization. First, not everyone has an iPhone. Second of all of the kinds of human relation that cannot take place through those social media become themselves marginalized. We can see that this is happening, positioned from where I am in protest movements, because every aspect of human behavior and potential that is marginalized in our society appears in our movements, appears in the demands that people make. So I'll give an example of this. Occupy Wall Street, which y'all are familiar with. 10 years ago, in the social movements I was involved in, a protest movement based on permanent physical presence would have been unthinkable, actually. Nobody would be able to imagine that you would be able to get everybody together in a park for months, right? So in an era when you don't have to go somewhere physically to do something, it seems ironic or unusual that a protest movement based on permanent physical presence would become the most famous protest movement of 2011. I don't think it's unusual, actually, because the people who were there for, I'm going to say two reasons. First, because they wanted physical presence. They wanted those interactions, all of the interactions that are pushed to the margins by our social media. And second, there were a lot of people who were there because in a social media-based world, not having technological access means that they were already marginalized and they had to be there in physical presence to be able to participate. So I'm going to hypothesize that this was not the last such struggle, that there are going to be intensifying social struggles coming from the ways that people are marginalized. And the question that I want to pose to you, creative, productive innovators of our age, is what technologies are people in these movements going to need? What technologies are the marginalized going to need? Over the summer when people occupied Gezi Park in Istanbul and engaged in a days-long standoff with the government that spread into conflicts all around the country, there was a mapping technology that they used to keep up with events around the city. But in crisis situations like in Egypt, we can imagine the need not just for minute-by-minute mapping, but actually technologies that would enable people to totally transform their society, because they're in an ongoing struggle basically with the military, disguised as different governments, right? So I'm going to pose this question to y'all. What technologies will the marginalized need in the conflicts that are going to erupt, right? This has to do, obviously, with collapse. Those who are not interconnected through the kind of technologies that interconnect you are already in a situation of collapse. The kind of collapse that is going to be slowly taking place to everybody who is not on the shrinking tip of the iceberg of a sinking global capitalism. This being a mixed metaphor, but you follow me. So I'll conclude with another metaphor, a historical metaphor. In 1848, there was a revolution in France in February. And as the news of this revolution arrived in other cities around Europe, there were revolutions in each of these cities, actually. There's a wave of revolutions. Why did this happen all at once? Well, it happened because poor people were suffering in increasingly unsurvivable conditions. It happened because there was a new bourgeoisie that had more social and economic leverage than it had political power. And it happened because of the incompetence of the rulers. Now, it didn't create an egalitarian society, because as soon as these revolutions kicked off, the bourgeoisie were like, what do we do to concentrate and preserve our own power and privilege? How can we do that? And ultimately sabotage the revolutions, leading to, in many cases, to another few decades of monarchy. Okay, fast forward to 2013. Now there's a lot of suffering, as other people have talked about on this microphone. There's also a class that has disproportionate social and economic leverage relative to the political system, which is increasingly dysfunctional. That class is y'all, obviously. And there is the incompetence of our rulers. And finally, there is going to be a collapse of the current ruling order. I can imagine two possible consequences for this. One is that programmers, as a class, do what they have to protect their privileges and to concentrate power in new structures. People feel very good about themselves and the ways that they concentrate power in their hands. The other way that this could play out is for people to side with the disenfranchised, with the marginalized aspects of ourselves, and with the people in our society who are marginalized. And this is what I'm hoping that you will do as you work in the forms of innovation ahead of you. Thank you very much for listening.